"Shoot him first. The maid isn't worth a bullet." The words had barely left his mouth when the dining room glass exploded, and more than 100 mercenaries flooded in to assassinate the billionaire mid-meal. Before the security team could react, the maid standing behind his chair pivoted, ripped a weapon from the first attacker, and fired with a precision born of instincts that never fade. No one in the room knew she was a retired Navy SEAL. In the opening seconds of chaos, she moved, shot, and repositioned faster than any trained guard. And when the billionaire realized he was still alive amid a table turned into a killing ground, the cruel paradox became clear. In this assassination, the most dangerous person was never the man at the table. It was the maid they had just dismissed. Rowan Hale stood there in the grand kitchen of the Vaughn estate that afternoon, wiping down the marble counters with a steady hand, her plain gray uniform hanging loose on her frame like it always did. She kept her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, no jewelry, no polish on her nails, just the quiet efficiency that made her blend into the background. The house sat high in the mountains, isolated, with views that stretched out over valleys thick with pine trees. But Rowan never paused to look. She moved from task to task, her steps soft on the tiled floor, aware of every creak in the old beams above her. Morella Vaughn swept in then, her heels clicking sharp against the stone, dressed in a silk blouse and pearls that screamed money without trying too hard. She was the kind of woman who smiled at parties but narrowed her eyes at anyone below her, and she stopped short when she saw Rowan still working on the staircase railing. "That's not shiny enough," Morella snapped, running a finger along the wood and holding it up like evidence in a trial. Rowan nodded once, dipped her cloth back into the bucket, and kept polishing without a word. Alaric Vaughn followed his wife in a moment later, his phone pressed to his ear, barking orders about some deal that involved numbers with too many zeros. He glanced at Rowan as if she were part of the furniture, then turned to Morella and said, "Tell her to hurry it up. We've got guests coming tonight." A couple of Alaric's business associates wandered in from the hall, laughing about a recent merger, one of them bumping into Rowan without apology. "Watch where you're standing, sweetheart," the taller one muttered, his voice laced with that fake charm that hid contempt. Rowan stepped aside, her expression unchanged, and continued her work as the rain started pattering against the windows outside, the storm building slow but sure. Just as Rowan finished the railing, Morella beckoned her toward the expansive patio doors, pointing a manicured finger at the stone terrace where the storm was already beginning to pool freezing water. "The guests will be smoking out there later," Morella said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness that barely masked the cruelty underneath. "Those stones look absolutely filthy with moss. I want them scrubbed before the first car arrives." It was 35 degrees outside, the wind howling through the valley, and Rowan wore only her thin cotton uniform. Without a coat, she stepped out into the biting gale, dropping to her knees on the jagged slate. For 40 minutes, she scrubbed until her knuckles were raw and red, the freezing rain soaking her to the bone, while inside the warm, glass-walled living room, Alaric and his associates watched her work, swirling their brandy snifters and laughing at something on the television. Occasionally, one would tap the glass and point at a missed spot, treating her not as a human being enduring the elements, but as a malfunctioning machine that needed calibration, completely indifferent to the shivering woman fighting hypothermia on their behalf. Later that evening, as the dinner preparations ramped up, Rowan carried trays of appetizers into the dining room, setting them down with care on the long oak table. The guests had arrived by then, a mix of Alaric's inner circle, sharp-suited men and women who talked about yachts and private jets like they were discussing the weather. Morella directed Rowan with a wave of her hand, saying, "Put those over there and don't hover." Rowan placed the plates quietly, her movements precise. But one of the guests, a stocky guy with a gold watch that flashed under the chandelier lights, leaned back in his chair and smirked. "This maid of yours, Alaric, she looks like she wandered in from a thrift store. You sure she's up to serving a crowd like this?" Laughter rippled around the table, light at first, but building as Morella joined in with a cold chuckle. "Honestly, Rowan, you could at least try to look presentable. No one's asking for miracles, but a little effort wouldn't kill you." Alaric didn't laugh, but he didn't stop them either. He just sipped his scotch and said, "As long as she does her job, who cares?" Another guest, a woman with perfectly manicured nails, leaned over to her companion and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "I bet she doesn't even know what half these forks are for." The humiliation escalated when a tall, lanky investor named Sterling decided to make Rowan his personal entertainment for the evening. As she moved to collect empty champagne flutes, Sterling deliberately placed his heavy, cigar ash-stained wool coat directly into her arms, right on top of the delicate crystal glasses she was balancing. "Check this for me, would you?" he asked, not bothering to make eye contact. The weight of the coat nearly toppled the tray, and Rowan had to strain every muscle in her forearms to keep the glass from shattering. Instead of apologizing, Sterling turned to the group and quipped, "Careful now, that coat is worth more than your life's earnings. Don't drop it." Alaric watched the struggle, the way Rowan's arms trembled under the impossible load, and simply checked his watch, annoyed by the delay in service. "Stop playing games with the help, Sterling," Alaric said, not out of kindness, but out of impatience. "She's slow enough as it is without you adding to the burden." Rowan absorbed the weight, stabilized the tray, and walked away with the heavy coat scratching against her neck, her face a mask of stone. Rowan straightened a napkin on the table, her back to them. And when the stocky guy reached out to grab a canapé from her tray, he let his hand brush against her arm a bit too long. "Oops, sorry, didn't see you there," he said, winking at the others. Rowan pulled the tray back slightly, met his eyes for a split second, and murmured, "No harm done." The room went on chatting, but that brief look made the guy shift in his seat, though he covered it with another joke. As the evening wore on and the storm outside turned the mountain roads into slick hazards, Rowan cleared the first course plates, stacking them neatly on her cart. The conversation at the table had shifted to Alaric's latest tech ventures, but Morella couldn't resist circling back. "Rowan, dear, when you're done with that, make sure the guest rooms are ready. We might have to put people up if this weather doesn't let up." Rowan nodded again, pushing the cart toward the kitchen, but Alaric called after her, "And stay out of sight unless we need you. Tonight's not for distractions." Before the main course, Alaric decided the soup was cooling too quickly in the drafty hall and snapped his fingers for Rowan to solve the problem. "Hold the tureen," he commanded, pointing to the heavy, scalding silver vessel filled with lobster bisque. "Keep it off the table surface so it stays warm near the heat lamp." For 20 agonizing minutes, Rowan stood like a statue beside the head of the table, holding the burning hot silver handles with nothing but thin white gloves protecting her skin. The heat blistered her palms, the muscles in her shoulders screaming from the static weight, but she didn't flinch. While she stood there in silent torture, the woman with the manicured nails regaled the table with a story about firing her own housekeeper for having too much attitude, occasionally glancing at Rowan to ensure the lesson was landing. Alaric didn't offer a stand or a trivet. He simply ate his salad, using Rowan as a piece of living, breathing furniture, utterly unconcerned that the woman serving him was suffering second-degree burns just to keep his soup at the optimal temperature. One of the guards stationed by the door, a burly man named Tate, who Alaric trusted with his life, snorted under his breath as Rowan passed. "Yeah, stick to the shadows, Maid. This crowd's above your pay grade." Rowan paused at the doorway, turned halfway, and said calmly, "Understood." But the way she said it, flat and unyielding, made Tate's smirk fade for a moment before he shook it off. Back in the kitchen, Rowan rinsed the dishes, her hands moving automatically, but she caught a glimpse of the security monitors on the wall, flickering just a hair, something off in the feed from the perimeter cameras. She wiped her hands on her apron, stepped closer, and watched the screen for a few seconds longer than usual. The rain hammered down harder now, wind whipping branches against the windows, and Rowan felt that old pull in her gut, the one that said trouble was brewing. She picked up the house phone, dialed the security room, and spoke low. "Check the outer cams. Looks like interference." The voice on the other end laughed it off. "Storm's playing tricks, Rowan. Go back to your chores." By the time dessert was served, the atmosphere in the dining room had loosened with wine and whiskey, but the undercurrent of dismissal toward Rowan hadn't eased. Morella complained about the coffee being too hot, shoving the cup back at Rowan with a hiss. "Can't you get anything right? Pour it again." Rowan took the cup without flinching, refilled it carefully, and set it down. The stocky guest from earlier piped up again, louder this time. "Come on, Morella, cut her some slack. She's probably never handled fine china before coming here." The table erupted in chuckles, and Alaric leaned forward, pointing at Rowan. "You know, if you spoke up more, maybe people wouldn't ride you so hard. But hey, silence is golden, right?" Tate, the guard, standing nearby, added his 2 cents. Or, in her case, silence is just Nothing. Like, who even are you anyway? Rowan arranged the dessert forks, her fingers steady. And when the woman with the manicured nails spilled a bit of sauce on the tablecloth, she blamed it on Rowan brushing by. Watch yourself next time. Clumsy much? Rowan cleaned it up quietly, but as she did, she noticed the lights dim just a fraction, the hum of the generator kicking in. The cruelty reached a fever pitch just moments before the chaos began, centered around a piece of Wagyu beef that slid off Sterling's fork and landed on the Persian rug. He stared at it, then looked up at Rowan with a devilish glint in his eye. $500 an ounce, he slurred, kicking the meat across the floor until it rested by Rowan's shoe. Ashamed to waste it. Go on, pick it up. When she bent to retrieve it with a napkin, he stopped her with a sharp tsk. No, with your teeth. Consider it a bonus. The table went dead silent, the degradation hanging thick in the air. Morella giggled nervously, waiting for Alaric to intervene, but Alaric merely swirled his wine, watching with detached curiosity to see if she would break. Rowan slowly straightened up, ignoring the meat, and looked Sterling dead in the eye, her pupil dilation shifting from servant to predator. "I'm not a dog," she whispered, her voice carrying a frequency that made the hair on Tate's arms stand up. Sterling opened his mouth to berate her, but that was the exact second the perimeter alarm finally screamed, cutting off his power trip and saving him from a violence he couldn't comprehend. The tension snapped when the first shot rang out, shattering the window behind Alaric's chair. Glass sprang across the table like deadly confetti. Screams erupted as the guests ducked, and in that instant, the doors burst open, mercenaries pouring in from multiple entry points, their gear black and tactical, faces masked. Calder Knox led the charge, his voice booming over the chaos. "Secure the target, ignore the staff." Rowan was already moving, her body dropping low behind the table, assessing the threats in a blink. 4 from the main door, 2 from the side entrance, more outside. Alaric froze in his chair, Morella clutching his arm, while Tate and the other guards fumbled for their sidearms. One mercenary leveled his rifle at Alaric, but Rowan lunged, disarming Tate in a fluid twist and firing once, the bullet finding its mark in the attacker's chest. The room exploded into full panic then, guests scrambling under the table, mercenaries returning fire. "What the hell?" Calder shouted into his comms. "Who's that woman?" Rowan rolled to cover behind an overturned chair, picking off another assailant with a headshot that echoed sharp against the thunder. Morella's screams cut through the gunfire, her face pale as she huddled beside Alaric, who was shouting for his guards. "Tate, do something!" But Tate was down, clutching a wound in his leg, his weapon discarded. A mercenary grabbed Morella by the hair, pulling her up as leverage and sneered, "This one's not on the list. Waste of time." Rowan fired from her position, dropping the man before he could pull the trigger, but another wave of attackers pushed in from the kitchen side. Calder's voice crackled over a speaker one of them carried. "Focus on Vaughn. The maid's just collateral." The stocky guest tried to run for the door, but a burst of automatic fire cut him down, blood pooling on the rug. Morella turned to Rowan, eyes wide with terror. "Help us, you idiot! Don't just stand there!" Alaric, crawling toward the panic button under the table, muttered, "She's useless. Always has been." Another guard went down, and the manicured woman sobbed, "Why isn't security handling this?" Rowan ignored them, methodically taking out threats, her breaths controlled, each shot counting. In the midst of the assault, Calder directed his teams via radio, his tone dripping with arrogance. "She's probably some wannabe hero. Take her out quick." His men advanced, suppressing fire, pinning Rowan behind a cabinet, bullets chipping wood around her. One mercenary laughed as he reloaded. "Look at her hiding like a scared little girl." Another added, "Bet she cleans houses better than she fights." The room filled with their taunts, even as bodies piled up. Morella whimpered to Alaric, "This is your fault. You hired her." Alaric hissed back, "Shut up. She's making it worse." A grenade rolled in from the hallway, and Rowan kicked it back out the shattered window, the explosion lighting up the night outside. Calder's laughter came over the comms. "Cute trick, Maid, but you're outnumbered. Give up now, and maybe we'll make it quick." Rowan ejected the empty magazine from her borrowed pistol, scavenged another from a fallen guard, and whispered into the air, though no one heard, her voice steady. She flanked left, using the shadows of the dimmed lights, and ambushed a squad of 3, her knife work silent and lethal. Calder's updates grew tense. "Team 2, report." "Team 2, Static answered. Rowan patched a quick bandage on a graze wound on her arm, then hacked into the house's smart system, using a hidden override she'd installed months ago. Lights strobed, disorienting the invaders. One mercenary stumbled into view, and she dropped him with a suppressed shot. As the firefight pushed into the kitchen, a mercenary larger than the rest cornered Rowan against the industrial refrigerators, knocking the gun from her hand. He grinned, pulling a combat knife, thinking he had the upper hand against the unarmed woman. Rowan didn't retreat. She reached behind her to the prep island and grabbed the only thing available, a heavy stainless steel meat tenderizer she had used earlier that day. When he lunged, she sidestepped with terrifying speed, slamming the spiked mallet into his wrist, shattering the bone and forcing him to drop the knife. Before he could scream, she spun and drove the tool into his temple, the sickening crunch audible over the storm. She caught his falling body and used it as a shield to absorb incoming fire from the doorway, proving that in her hands, even a kitchen utensil was a weapon of mass destruction, all while Alaric watched from the hallway, his jaw hanging loose in shock. The group was pinned down in the pantry when the manicured woman, hysterical and shaking, decided her wealth was her only salvation. She stood up amidst the flying bullets, waving her diamond-encrusted phone at the mercenaries advancing down the hall. "I can wire you millions!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Just let me go! I'm not with them." The lead mercenary paused only to laugh, raising his rifle to cut her down for the sport of it. Rowan didn't hesitate. She tackled the woman to the ground just as the bullets shredded the drywall where her head had been a second ago. Instead of gratitude, the woman shoved Rowan off, looking down at her designer silk dress now smeared with the mercenary's blood from Rowan's vest. "You ruined it!" she shrieked, slapping Rowan's arm. "This is vintage. You clumsy bitch, look what you did." Rowan stared at her, the absurdity of the complaint washing over her, then silently dragged the ungrateful woman back into cover as a fresh volley of gunfire decimated the shelves above them. Alaric's face twisted in disbelief as more mercenaries fell, the tide shifting impossibly. "This can't be happening. She's just the maid." He pounded the floor, his empire crumbling in real time. Morella clung to him, tears streaming. "Do something, Alaric! Pay them off!" But the remaining guards deserted, slipping out a side door amid the chaos. Calder's forces pressed harder, but losses mounted, and Alaric yelled at Rowan across the room, "You're supposed to protect us! Earn your keep!" The manicured woman, now hysterical, pointed at Rowan. "She's drawing them in! It's her fault!" Gunfire rattled the walls, and Alaric slumped against the table leg, muttering, "I never should have let her stay." Even as the walls were being chewed apart by high-caliber rounds, Alaric's delusion of control remained perfectly intact. From his crouched position behind the kitchen island, he spotted his platinum-case smartphone buzzing on the exposed dining table, 10 feet away in the open killing zone. "Rowan!" he barked, snapping his fingers as if asking for a refill of wine. "Get my phone. I need to call the governor." When Rowan ignored him to reload her weapon, Alaric grabbed her ankle, nearly tripping her. "I gave you an order. Retrieve the phone or you're fired." He was willing to risk her life for a phone call, treating the active combat zone like a minor inconvenience to his schedule. Rowan kicked his hand away, not with malice, but with the practical force needed to dislodge a nuisance, and sprinted into the open, not for the phone, but to drag a heavy oak sideboard across the entrance, barricading them in just as a grenade detonated where the phone had been, vaporizing it instantly. Alaric stared at the scorch mark, blinking, then muttered, "I'll deduct that phone from your final check." Rowan herded the surviving guests toward the basement stairs, covering their retreat with bursts of fire that kept the mercenaries at bay. She rigged a door with wiring from the wall, electrifying it just as a group charged. Screams followed the sparks. Calder's team fragmented, voices panicked on the radio. "She's picking us off one by one. Fall back." Rowan led Alaric and Morella down a narrow passage, her steps sure in the dark. Calder, now visible through a window, took a hit to his shoulder from her sniper-like shot. He clutched the wound, staring in realization. "Ex-Special Forces? Damn it, she's SEAL!" The word hung, explaining everything, the survival, the tactics. The group retreated into the estate's extensive wine cellar, a maze of floor-to-ceiling vintage bottles worth millions. Three mercenaries breached the heavy oak doors, their tactical lights cutting through the dust. Rowan was out of ammunition. Alaric whimpered in the corner, "Don't let them break the vintage Bordeaux's." Ignoring the guns pointed at his head, Rowan grabbed a bottle of 1945 Romani Conti, a bottle Alaric had boasted cost more than a house, and didn't hesitate. She smashed it against the stone pillar, using the jagged glass neck to sever the jugular of the first attacker in the dark. As the second fired blindly, she hurled a crate of the priceless wine into him, the heavy wood and glass knocking him unconscious. She used the spilled alcohol and a Zippo lighter from the first guard's pocket to create a flash fire barrier against the third. As the flames licked up the shelves, destroying the collection, Alaric screamed, "No! Stop! You're burning my legacy!" Mourning the fermented grapes, while Rowan stood amidst the burning alcohol fumes, ensuring he lived to complain about it, Calder cornered them in the lower level, his remaining men circling, but his confidence cracked. "Okay, Maid, or whatever you are, let's talk terms." He offered a briefcase of cash from one of his packs. "Take it and walk." Alaric, desperate, shouted over Rowan's shoulder, "Yes, save me first. She works for me." Morella nodded frantically. "Please, Rowan, think about it. You don't belong in this fight anymore." Calder smirked weakly. "See? Even your boss knows you're done." The tension thickened, guns trained on her. Suddenly, Calder's earpiece crackled with a frantic whisper from his sniper outside, a man known for never losing his cool. "Sir, the way she moves. I've seen the thermal signature. That's not just a seal. That's the Wraith of Kandahar." The color drained from Calder's face beneath his mask. He looked at Rowan, the way she stood, perfectly still, weight balanced, breathing undetectable. The legend of the Wraith was a campfire story among mercenaries. A soldier who cleared entire compounds with nothing but a knife and the dark. "That's impossible," Calder stammered, taking an involuntary step back. "She's dead. The file said she was KIA." Rowan didn't speak. She simply tilted her head, the lightning outside illuminating the terrifying emptiness in her eyes. She wasn't fighting for survival anymore. She was hunting. The realization that they were locked in a house not with a maid, but with a myth, broke the morale of Calder's elite squad instantly, their weapons wavering as they realized they were the ones trapped. In the chaos of the basement corridors, Tate, the limp and useless head of security, saw an opportunity to save his own skin. A gunman appeared at the end of the narrow hallway, leveling his weapon. Instead of firing back, Tate grabbed Morella by the shoulders and shoved her violently into the line of fire to create a distraction, screaming, "Don't shoot me!" Morella stumbled, falling directly into the mercenary's sights, her eyes locking with the barrel. It was the ultimate betrayal, the protector sacrificing the protected. But the shot never came. Rowan had anticipated the cowardice. She fired a single round through a gap in the plumbing pipes overhead. The steam pipe burst, scalding the gunman and blinding him instantly. Tate cowered against the wall, trembling, while Morella lay on the floor, looking from the steaming corpse to the man she paid to protect her, finally seeing the difference between a paycheck patriot and a true warrior. Rowan shoved them toward the boiler room, the heat intense, the noise of the machinery masking their movements. She knew this room better than the engineers who built it. As Calder's B team breached the steel doors, expecting a shootout, Rowan didn't fire a single shot. She had already rigged the pressure release valves. With a yank of a lever, she unleashed a wall of superheated steam that filled the confined space instantly. The mercenaries screamed as the white fog blinded and burned them, their tactical goggles useless. Rowan moved through the scalding mist like a phantom, unaffected, using the whiteout to snap limbs and crush windpipes with bare hands. Alaric and the others watched from the safety of the maintenance tunnel, seeing only shadows and hearing the wet thuds of bodies hitting the floor, realizing that the woman who folded their laundry was currently dismantling a kill squad with the environment itself. Rowan disarmed Calder with a swift move, zip-tying him to a pipe without a fatal blow, leaving him to face whatever authorities came next. She escorted Alaric and Morella through a hidden tunnel she'd mapped out long ago, emerging into the stormy night where a black helicopter waited, rotors whirring low, handing Alaric over to the waiting agents, old contacts from her SEAL days. Rowan watched as they bundled him aboard. Morella hesitated, glancing back. "Who are you, really?" But Rowan just turned away, vanishing into the trees as dawn broke, her uniform torn but her stride unbroken. The extraction team signaled for them to board, the rotor wash flattening the grass. Alaric, seeing the rescue, instantly reverted to his arrogant self. He elbowed the bleeding manicured woman aside and tried to scramble into the helicopter first. "I'm the priority!" he screamed at the pilot. "Get me out of here!" He reached for the door handle, blocking the path for the injured. Rowan didn't tolerate it. She grabbed Alaric by the back of his expensive Italian collar and physically hurled him backward into the mud. He landed hard, spluttering with indignation. "You can't touch me! I own you!" he shrieked. Rowan loomed over him, her silhouette dark against the flashing cockpit lights, and for the first time, she spoke with the command voice of a Tier 1 operator. "You are baggage. Sit down and shut up, or I leave you for the wolves." Alaric froze, shrinking under the sheer weight of her authority, and crawled to the back of the line, finally understanding his place in the food chain. In the aftermath, Morella faced scrutiny when leaks exposed her involvement in Alaric's shady deals. She lost her social standing, dropped by every elite circle she'd clung to. Tate, the guard, got fired on the spot by the new security firm, his cowardice caught on surviving footage. Calder's team survivors scattered, but he ended up in federal custody, his operation dismantled online by anonymous tips. Alaric's empire crumbled under investigations, his assets frozen. The manicured woman saw her sponsorships vanish after videos of the night surfaced, branding her as part of the toxic crowd. A week later, Alaric and Morella sat in a sterile government debriefing room, stripped of their finery, waiting for their lawyer. The door opened, and they sat up straighter, expecting an official. Instead, Rowan walked in, dressed in civilian clothes, jeans and a leather jacket, a duffel bag over her shoulder. She placed a single item on the metal table, her resignation letter, stained with a single drop of dried blood. Alaric scoffed, trying to muster his old bravado. "You think you can just walk away, after everything I lost? You work for me until I say you're done." Rowan looked at him, then at Morella, her expression one of profound pity. She didn't shout. She didn't lecture. She simply reached into her pocket, pulled out the cheap plastic name tag she had been forced to wear for 3 years, and slid it across the table. "I never worked for you, Alaric," she said softly. "I was just passing through." She turned and walked out the door, leaving them alone in the silence of their own irrelevance, the sound of her boots fading down the hall, the final punctuation to their downfall. Rowan never looked back, her silence now a shield that echoed louder than any victory speech. Those who had judged her learned the hard way that appearances deceive, and strength hides in the quiet ones. You see, sometimes the overlooked rise up, not for revenge, but because it's who they are. It hurts when the world dismisses you, but holding steady, that's where the real power lies. You've felt that sting before, haven't you? Know this, you're not alone in it. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally, healing.